there everyone, Tyler Pyburn here with Phil DiMartino. We're from 5 Tool Productions. Yep, that guy right there, that company, that's us. So anyways, we're from 5 Tool Productions. This is another edition of the video podcast. So today we're talking about the boom. Basically, if things can go wrong, they will go wrong. And what do you have to do to mitigate those problems ahead of time? That's kind of the whole premise of this. So Phil and I, we were actually at a conference. We were working a conference. I think this was in January.
I think so, yeah.
7 months ago. And we heard a great speaker. Their keynote speaker was actually Juliette Kayyem. She worked for the Department of Homeland Security. And she, I mean, anytime you have that in your title, you know you've dealt with some pretty interesting situations.
And people got to pay attention to you.
Exactly. So, which we did, and she really kind of caught our attention. So really, at the end of the day, what she came up with and said, look, the boom is what happens when things go wrong. And you can plan and hope to plan that things don't go wrong. But if it can, it will. So you also have to plan for after the boom. So there's the before the boom when everything is going all hunky-dory. There's the boom when things go wrong. And then there's after the boom, what actually happens to take place. And one of the things, one example that she used that I thought was really great was the blizzard of '78. She said that, you know, people drove, and unfortunately, it wasn't that people crashed. It was actually because they got carbon monoxide poisoning, and that's how they ended up passing away. So that's the reason now why they say, don't drive. Not so much because of crashes, but because getting stuck in some sort of carbon
But before
monoxide.
that happens, how are you going to know,
Exactly.
right?
So right now, this kind of works for every single industry out there, whether it's a marketing problem, whether it's a PR nightmare, or whether you're like us, you know, you work on a lot of live streaming. Things are bound to go wrong, so what can you plan for afterwards as well?
Yeah, and you've mentioned it already, but I think the most important part of her presentation and her speech was the idea that if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. And if you, no matter how much, that doesn't mean you don't prepare. You know, you prepare and you do everything you can to mitigate your risk. But the idea is that if there is something that can go wrong, eventually, over enough repetition, it will. And you have to be ready for bouncing back after that, unless you want to be completely crushed. And that's true across industries. And I think that's just an important lesson to learn for everybody. And sometimes it takes things going wrong for people to actually stand up and take notice. But it's better to be proactive than it is to be reactive, almost across the board. So, you know, from a production standpoint for us, I think that means, you know, in advance, you put in layers of replication to try to avoid the failure. But we also try to think a lot about, okay, well, what if this piece of equipment dies?
What happens if this all of a sudden...
What if we lose power?
Exactly. Something gets unplugged somewhere. Someone kicks a cord out by accident, right? What's next?
What if
happens if the internet dies in one spot? Well, what do you have as a backup? And, you know, we've gotten caught. It's happened to us before. Everybody, right? Where something dies and then you don't have that replication or that little safety net that's there to help you. And I think that's the important part. I use safety net because actually that's really what it is. It's something there to catch you if you do fall. You might not be able to have it set up perfectly that, well, once this dies, this rolls in. Once this dies, this rolls in. Because it's never really as easy as that sounds. But do you have something to catch you from falling so you don't go all the way to the ground, so you can kind of get back up a little bit quicker, right?
Right, and I think that's kind of the hard part, right, is that there's very few times when you have, like, no safety net whatsoever. So there's levels to this, too. Like, when is it going overboard, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Because sometimes you can also go you can go too far and you can overcomplicate your process and be thinking so much about the failure that you
don't focus on you don't focus on the before the boom part, right? Of making sure that part's right and really good.
Right, so there is a balance to it too, I think. And it's true, you know, I think PR is one of the biggest things for this too. You know, you mentioned, you know, the blizzard of '78 as one of the things in terms of like a policy and, you know, public awareness and procedural, but there's also things, you know, big disasters, you know, if a company does something, gets caught doing something poorly or something bad happens, you know, like the BP oil spill came up during her speech, I think, as well. And, you know, that's a high risk field to be in. But they were, you know, you have to be prepared to recover appropriately and own up to your mistakes and not cover up and fix the problems before it becomes a crisis. So crisis management comes into this, and like you said, it's applicable to everybody. I think for marketing, you know, in the age of social media marketing, everything happens so fast. The boom for a social media manager probably is more, you know, a small scale version of like a PR crisis, more applicable to like, hopefully not anything in the realm of
not to
a
that
BP
extent.
oil spill.
But say maybe your CEO gets caught doing something stupid.
Doing something
right?
inappropriate,
Yeah.
or a bad customer service experience. You think
Yep.
about the airlines deal with this type of thing all the time, where varying degrees of bad things happen on a flight, and then the conversation happens on social and it shifts, and they're caught unaware and unready for the boom. And I think you know, a lot of time, then there's examples of companies ideally, hopefully trying to bounce back from this correctly, and maybe they'll have a controversy in a store, and you know, the CEO will come out quickly and the social media team will come out quickly and say, you know, we screwed up, here's what we're going to do to make it right. And that's really being ready for the boom, is having policies in place and talking points in place to come back and talk about these things after the fact. So I think from a social media standpoint, a lot of this is crisis management. From a production standpoint, the world we live in, more on the day-to-day, it's about equipment and connectivity and a lot of these other things that...
Yeah, exactly. And they, you know, people make mistakes too. I mean, there's been times, I mean, I remember you and me were at a conference, this was, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago, and something didn't get recorded, right? The only interview that we were supposed to get, that we actually had to get, didn't get recorded.
Right.
And really, we kind of owned up to it, fessed up to it. You know, we put it in the hands of someone that we shouldn't have at that point in time. And people do make mistakes. So rather than let it go and let 2 months go by and let the client on the other end, this was with a prior employer, this wasn't even with this company, this is when Phil and I worked together a long time ago. We let them know right away, right? Before things have a chance to spiral and get
how
out
are
of
you going
hand.
to make it right?
How are you going to make it right?
Yeah.
Having that plan in place ahead of time helps you, right?
Right, and every mistake, ideally what happens is you have a small boom that wakes you up and makes you more prepared for a bigger potential mistake.
Because it makes you realize that something much larger can go wrong. Right?
I guess the bottom line about this is really just like try to be thoughtful and have processes and procedures in place, and also just do as much testing as you possibly can, right? I mean, from a production standpoint, you know, you talk about if you work in live long enough, and you were in traditional TV before this.
Oh gosh, I was one time recording, a fun story, I was recording morning sports at night, and it was during American Idol, and the director happened to hit the switch, go live. This is when American Idol was in its heyday, and they happened to see me just kind of goofing off on set, singing one of Nelly's songs. And this shows when I was actually on TV, when it was popular. But I was singing a Nelly song at that point in time, but it's just a mistake that happened. And they have to just let people know, oh, yep, we made the mistake. We ran a crawl at the bottom because that was the procedure that was in place. If something happens, run a crawl at the bottom. You don't want to be starting from scratch, thinking about what your plan of action is after the boom happened. Right? That's the biggie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. So take that as a grain of salt, and whether you're in production, whether you're in PR, whether you're in marketing, plan for the boom.
Because it's going to happen.
Because it's going to happen, no matter what. All right, he's Phil. I'm Tyler. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.